ATM, America's Thinking Man here, today to discuss the Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights, passed in 1791. Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So why was that written? Well, we had just fought a war of revolution against England, King George III. And it was fresh in their minds, the founding fathers, the writers of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, how the king and his jackbooted thugs had pretty much taken their liberties with the American people, and how it was that an oppressive government needed to be overthrown, which it was. But they were still afraid because they were afraid of our own military and the possibility that the presidents might try to make themselves king one day. So they wrote the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment especially in mind, not because they wanted to allow people to hunt or shoot sporting clays or go to the range and practice. They wanted people to keep and bear arms so there would be a opposing force against an oppressive government. So if the government tried to use the military to oppress the people would be able to fight back. That is the reason that the Second Amendment is in the Constitution. It has absolutely nothing to do with hunting or sporting or any of that stuff. All it has to do with is the people's right to protect themselves against an oppressive government. So then you have to ask yourself, why is it that the one institution that wants to change that amendment is the government itself? And how did they do that? Well, back after the back after the Civil War, there were laws written down south to curtail gun ownership because the Southerners were afraid if the blacks, the ex-slaves, got their hands on guns, there might be another revolution. So they wrote laws to make sure that blacks couldn't own weapons. As a matter of fact, during the wars, most black soldiers were not armed. World War I, World War II, most of them were trained as they provided service. They were a service industry military because our government didn't want to put weapons into the hands of blacks because, again, they were afraid because of the way they had been treated and were still being treated at the times that they might start a revolution and try to, overthrow the government, have a war within our boundaries again. So a lot of the laws that are passed were racially motivated. But the newer laws are mostly all motivated by modern man's rejection of the Second Amendment. And what do I mean by that? Well, the St. Valentine's Massacre was motivation to do away with, have a ban on automatic weapons, machine guns. Why? Because the people saw this heinous crime committed, and the government saw that the people were upset, so they used that as leverage to pass this law and to infringe upon the rights of the people. When John Kennedy was assassinated, laws were written about buying weapons through mail order. when Ronald Reagan there was an attempt on his life, we had more gun laws written. So every time there is a heinous crime committed, the government uses the people's disgust with these crimes to try to take away the rights of the people to keep and bear arms. This is something that everybody needs to think about. Okay, the government is kind of like a boa constrictor wrapping itself around its victim. And every time the victim exhales, the boa constrictor tightens its grip on the victim. So the victim can no longer inhale anymore. And as it continues to exhale, finally to the point where it cannot inhale anymore, it's dead. And that is what our government tries to do every time they try to write gun laws. There were bans on handguns in Washington, D.C., in Illinois. Illinois, as a matter of fact, is the only state in our union that had a ban on concealed carry weapons. The only state up until recently, when they were finally sued and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the guy who sued them won his case. Now they have to allow people to get concealed carry permits. But these permits are so onerous. That's the other thing that a lot of states do. They try to make it so hard. It's costly. It's very hard to do. You have to take classes on how to, shoot a handgun. And, you have to pass all of these tests. So they make it very, very difficult to get a handgun, to get a permit. So the government, again, is trying its best to oppress the people, to take away their rights. These are things that we need to think about. These are the things that the founders thought about and passed on down through the generations. But as man has gotten away from rural living on farms where there was a necessity to have guns for protection, and had moved into the cities, became more of an urban creature. They rely more on the police state and the government for protection as opposed to relying on themselves for protection. But they should never, ever forget why it was that the Second Amendment was written. And it was written so we could protect ourselves from an oppressive government. Once we can no longer do that, King George will be back. God bless America and the Second Amendment. ATM, America's thinking man here, thinking out loud. Thanks for listening.